Hey, Wide Awake family. If you're not part of the family yet and love creepy stories, then hit that subscribe button and join us. Tap the bell icon so you'll never miss a story. It really helps out the channel. If you've already done all that, then smash that like button to lock it in, and please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story.
I thought it was going to be a regular first date. We'd been messaging for maybe 2 weeks. Nothing too deep, just enough to know she wasn't boring. She was flirty, quick with comebacks, and had that kind of easy humor that made you want to keep the conversation going. No oversharing, no long paragraphs about exes or trauma, just light, simple banter. We agreed to meet at a small burger place halfway between where we both lived. She said she'd drive because she had errands afterward, and I told her I'd bring my own car too so there wouldn't be any weird ride home dynamic if it didn't click. When I pulled into the lot, she was already inside, sitting in a corner booth. She waved when she saw me and stood to shake my hand. In person, she looked just like her photos, maybe better actually. Dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail, black jacket, dark jeans, a necklace that caught the light when she moved. We ordered quickly, double cheeseburger for me, some kind of grilled chicken sandwich for her. The conversation flowed easily. She laughed at my dumb jokes, asked about my job, told me about hers in a way that felt conversational but not rehearsed, and she kept complimenting my car. Not in a weird way at first, just little comments. That blue really pops. What year is it? Does it handle well in the rain? Harmless, I thought. People talk about cars all the time, especially if they're into them. She said she liked driving but hated city traffic. I figured she was just making conversation. About halfway through the meal, she glanced toward the window and said she left her phone in her car. She excused herself, walked out, and was gone maybe 5 minutes. When she came back, she smiled like nothing had happened, slid back into the booth, and the conversation picked up where it left off. We finished eating, and I told her I had to head out because I had an early morning. She said she was going to stick around and grab a coffee to go. We said goodbye right there at the table. It didn't feel strange at the time that she didn't walk out with me. People linger all the time. Outside, the lot was quiet except for a couple of cars idling near the exit. I walked to where I'd parked earlier, only my car wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired and misremembering. I walked up and down the road twice, scanning the license plates. Still nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of movement, my car's taillights turning onto the street, the blue paint catching the glow of the street lamp. She was driving it. I froze. For a second, my brain refused to accept it. I knew the way she sat forward slightly when she drove. I'd seen her do it earlier when she talked about her commute. Her hair was unmistakable, and she was flooring it. By the time my brain caught up to what I was seeing, she was gone. I ran back inside, phone already in my hand. Standing in the restaurant doorway, I called the police and gave them the make, model, and plate number. I told them exactly what happened, that I'd met her for the first time, gone outside, and watched her drive away in my car. While I was on the phone, the server who'd been taking care of our table came over. She looked uneasy and said she'd seen the woman standing by my car earlier when she went out for a smoke break. She thought we were together, so she didn't question it. And that's when the cold pit in my stomach turned into something worse. The only way she could have driven off was if she had my keys. My keys had been in my jacket pocket, the jacket I draped over the back of my chair while we ate. The only time I'd left the table was when I went to the bathroom about halfway through the meal, the exact time she'd gone to grab her phone from her car. She must have gone through my jacket, slipped the keys into her bag, and walked back in like nothing happened. The cops told me they'd put out a report, but warned me not to expect an immediate recovery. Sometimes they turned up within hours, sometimes weeks, sometimes never. That night, I couldn't sit still. I kept replaying every detail. The way she'd asked about my car, not just casually, but specifically, mileage, model year, handling. The way she'd chosen a corner booth, far from the windows, so she could keep her bag in her lap without anyone noticing what she was doing. Even the timing of her phone in the car excuse, perfectly synced with my bathroom break. I didn't sleep much. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was the police. They found the car. It was sitting in a parking garage 2 towns over. No major damage, but the glove box had been rifled through, the cash I kept for tolls was gone, and so were my spare sunglasses. Nothing else. It was almost like she hadn't even cared about the car itself, just wanted to get what she could from it and ditch it. When I picked it up the next day, there was this lingering smell inside, her perfume, faint but unmistakable. It was weirdly unsettling, like she left a fingerprint I couldn't erase. I tried calling her number, but it was disconnected. Her dating profile, gone. Not unmatched, not blocked. Deleted. Every trace of her was wiped clean, like she'd never existed. It hit me then that this probably wasn't her first time. She knew exactly what she was doing. The charm, the flirty banter, the questions that seemed harmless but were just a setup for what she really wanted. She'd probably done it enough times to know exactly how long she could be gone from the table without raising suspicion. The scariest part, I never even noticed she'd taken my keys. That, more than anything, stuck with me. Now, whenever I park somewhere on a date, I check my keys about 100 times. They never leave my pocket. My jacket never leaves my sight. And I definitely never underestimate how much someone can learn or take from you in just one meal. Because she didn't just steal my car for a night. She stole a part of me that believed you could meet someone for the first time and assume they had good intentions. And I don't think I'm getting that back anytime soon. He called it family dinner, and I thought he meant exactly that. Parents, maybe a couple of siblings, a casual meal in the suburbs. We'd been on 2 dates before. Both were normal enough. He was a little eccentric, liked to make cryptic little jokes that didn't always land, but I chalked it up to personality quirks. The plan was simple: meet him at his place at 7, have dinner with his family, maybe watch a movie afterward. He'd mentioned that his house was a little out there, so I drove. The farther I got from the city, the fewer streetlights there were. Eventually, GPS told me to turn onto a narrow road lined with tall trees. The pavement was cracked and uneven, like it hadn't been maintained in years. Then I saw it, a large, old-looking building set back from the road, half hidden by branches. It wasn't exactly a house. The structure looked like it had been something else once, maybe a community hall or an old school, and had been awkwardly converted into a home. The siding was faded, the roofline uneven. Every window glowed with warm yellow light, but all the curtains were drawn tight. He opened the door before I even knocked, smiling. But his voice was quieter than usual, almost a whisper. "You made it," he said, as if speaking louder might disturb something. He took my coat before I could really look around and told me everyone was just getting started. Inside, the smell hit me first, strong and layered. Incense, definitely, but with something else underneath. Herbal, smoky. It clung to my clothes instantly. The lighting was dim, with only a few lamps casting deep shadows on the high ceilings. There was no dining table in the main room. Instead, a dozen chairs were arranged in a wide circle, and every chair was occupied except one. The people sitting there weren't chatting or laughing like you'd expect before dinner. They were chanting. Low, drawn-out syllables I couldn't understand. The sound was perfectly synchronized, like they'd rehearsed it for years. No one looked at me, but I could feel him register my presence, like a subtle shift in temperature. He gestured toward the empty chair without a word. It wasn't just an extra seat, it was directly across from the door, perfectly positioned to face the rest of the group. For a few seconds I stood there, trying to convince myself this was some sort of quirky icebreaker. Maybe his family was into meditation, or this was their version of saying grace. But the longer I listened, the more I realized this wasn't for show. The chanting vibrated in my chest. Some had their eyes closed. Others stared at the center of the circle. On a low table sat a single candle, its flame steady despite the occasional draft. Around it were several small bowls filled with liquid that shimmered faintly in the light. He leaned close and whispered, "It'll make more sense if you sit down." My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself forward. The chair was so close to the next person that our knees almost touched. The woman beside me didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept her gaze fixed on the candle. The chanting continued until one man, older, bald, dressed in a loose, earth-toned robe, lifted his hands. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Without a word, the people began passing the bowls around the circle. No one explained what was in them. When mine reached me, it was worn, the ceramic slightly rough against my hands. I lifted it just enough to smell it. Earthy, metallic, almost like blood diluted with tea. I didn't drink. I just held it, forcing my expression to stay neutral. He noticed. I saw him glance at me, his eyebrows twitching as if to silently urge me to take a sip. I set the bowl gently on the floor beside my chair instead. The man in the row began speaking again, this time in the same language as the chant. The group responded in short, sharp bursts. It wasn't like any prayer I'd ever heard. It was too rhythmic, too precise, like an exchange in a script. I was so tense my back ached. My eyes kept flicking to the front door, running calculations in my head. How far was it? How quickly could I stand up, grab my coat, and get outside? Then the man in the row turned toward me. Not just a passing glance, he locked onto me. And this time, he spoke in English. Welcome home. The words landed like a physical touch. It was like a signal. Every single person in the circle turned their head toward me in perfect unison. No blinking, no smiles, just unwavering stares. The silence felt like it might crush me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I mumbled something about needing the bathroom and stood, my legs almost giving out. He didn't try to stop me, but his eyes followed me as I crossed the room. I reached the hallway and spotted my coat hanging on a hook. My hand didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, turned toward the door, and walked straight out without looking back. The night air hit me like cold water. I shoved my arms in my sleeves as I walked fast, not running, but close enough. The second I reached my car, I unlocked it, slid in, and started the engine. That's when I heard it, moving inside the building. Chairs scraping, footsteps, more than one set. I didn't wait to see who was coming. My tires squealed as I pulled out of the driveway and onto the road. The trees swallowed the building from view, but I swear I could still feel eyes on me. I didn't slow down until I saw highway signs. Even then, my hands kept shaking on the steering wheel. I had to pull over once just to catch my breath. He texted me later that night. Just one line, "You left before the important part." I didn't respond. I blocked his number, deleted our messages, unmatched him on the app. I still don't know if they were some kind of cult, a secret society, or just a group with a hobby so bizarre it didn't need explaining. And honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that family dinner doesn't always mean what you think it does. And I haven't said yes to one since.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
It was supposed to be one of those low-effort first dates. We met online about a week earlier. Her profile was normal enough, a few pictures of her hiking, a short bio that didn't try too hard, no obvious red flags. Our messages have been casual. She wasn't clingy or overly intense, and she didn't flood me with texts. Honestly, I liked that. It felt low pressure. We'd agreed to meet at this little cafe one afternoon. Not a fancy coffee shop, just one of those cozy, slightly cluttered places with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. The kind of spot where you could have one drink, chat for a bit, and leave if it was awkward. When I got there, she was already outside, leaning against the wall with an oversized purse hanging from her shoulder. The bag looked like the kind people use for weekend trips, big enough to fit a change of clothes, but soft enough to fold in on itself. I noticed it right away because it seemed full. Not bursting, but definitely packed with something. She smiled when she saw me. We exchanged a quick hey and went inside. Conversation was fine. Not amazing, not bad, just normal. We talked about work, music, random shows we liked. She asked about my hobbies, laughed at a few of my jokes, and kept the energy light. The bag sat on the floor beside her chair the entire time, the strap curled awkwardly on the tile. I don't know why, but I remember thinking it was weird she didn't just put it behind her or hang off the chair like most people do. We stayed about an hour before she suggested taking a short walk. The cafe was on a street lined with small boutiques, thrift shops, and bookstores. It sounded nice, so I agreed. We'd been walking maybe 5 minutes when she shifted the strap on her shoulder and said, half joking, "This thing's heavier than usual. You could carry it for a bit if you wanted." It wasn't really framed as a question, more like a casual suggestion. Without thinking, I said sure and took it from her. The moment the strap settled on my shoulder, I realized she wasn't exaggerating. It wasn't just heavy, it was dense, and the weight wasn't evenly distributed either. It felt like something solid sat at the bottom. Something long. My first thought was maybe a water bottle or a big makeup case, but the shape didn't fit. We kept walking. She pointed out a shop window filled with vintage glassware, rambling about how her grandmother used to collect the same kind. I nodded along, but my focus kept drifting back to the bag. Every step made the weight shift against my hip, and I started wondering what could be inside. A few blocks later, she stopped to look at a display of books at another store window. As she turned slightly, the strap slipped down my shoulder. I caught it before it fell completely, but the bag tilted just enough that the zipper slid open about an inch. I don't know why I looked. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was curiosity. But I glanced down into that tiny gap and froze. Under a folded sweater and some scattered makeup items was a kitchen knife. A big one. The kind with a broad blade you'd use for carving a roast or breaking down a chicken. The handle faced upward, and the blade was wrapped loosely in a rag, not secured, not carefully stored, just stuffed in there. And the rag didn't fully cover it. The exposed part of the blade had smears on it. Dark, dried, flaking. For half a second, I told myself it was food, maybe tomato sauce, maybe barbecue, but the color was wrong. Too deep with a brownish undertone that made my stomach turn, and the smears weren't even. They were clumped in spots, like something had been wiped onto the blade instead of evenly staining it from cooking. I zipped the bag shut without hesitating, my movements slow and careful, like I was suddenly aware I was holding something dangerous. She didn't notice. She was still looking at the display, pointing at a title she said she'd read in college. But now every step felt different. The bag seemed heavier in my hands, like the knowledge of what was inside made the weight more real. And I kept thinking about the way she handed it over so casually. She either didn't care if I saw it, or she assumed I wouldn't. We kept walking for maybe 5 more minutes. My answers to her questions were shorter now, my mind focused on keeping my face neutral. I didn't want her to know I'd looked. I didn't want her to guess what I was thinking. Then, just as casually as she'd given it to me, she asked for it back. I handed it over instantly, relieved to feel a weight leave my shoulder. She swung it over her own like nothing was unusual and kept walking beside me. After another block, she said she had to take care of something and gestured toward a side street. I told her it was fine, that I'd head back toward my car. She smiled, waved, and walked away. I stood there for a few seconds, watching her go. The bag strap cut across her back, and I couldn't stop picturing the knife inside. The rag wrapped around the blade, the dry, dark smears clinging to the metal. I don't know where she was going. I don't know why she was carrying that knife. I never asked. I didn't want to. When I got to my car, I locked the doors before I even started the engine. I drove home with this cold, hollow feeling in my chest, like I just sidestepped something I couldn't quite name. That night, I blocked her number, deleted the app we'd met on, and now, every time I see someone carrying an oversized purse, I think about the weight of that bag, the uneven pull on my shoulder, the flash of metal under the sweater, and I wonder if she ever handed it to someone else. I wasn't expecting anything weird that night. We'd been talking for a couple of weeks. He was normal enough over text, not overbearing, not creepy, just the usual what's your favorite food, and we should hang out kind of stuff. No excessive emojis, no weird midnight calls, no love bombing. He seemed normal. We agreed to meet at this little bar/diner halfway between our apartments. It wasn't fancy, but it had booths, decent cocktails, and good reviews. I figured worst case scenario, the date would be average and I'd go home with a full stomach. When I got there, he was already sitting in a booth by the window. 2 drinks on the table, one for him, one clearly for me. That detail didn't bother me at the time, it felt polite. He stood up, smiled, gave a quick wave. The conversation was easy enough. We talked about work, the weird winter weather, how both of us had grown up in smaller towns before moving here. He seemed relaxed, maybe a little too confident, but nothing that set off alarms. About an hour in, after we'd ordered food, I excused myself to use the bathroom. I left my bag and my phone sitting in the booth seat next to me. I don't know why I didn't take it. I almost always do, even if I'm just stepping away for a second. Maybe because it was a small place and I could see the table from the hallway. The bathroom was only a short walk down past the bar, maybe 2 minutes away. There was no line. I washed my hands, fixed my hair, and came right back. When I got to the table, my bag was there, but my phone wasn't. At first, I figured maybe it had slid down between the booth cushions. I checked. Nothing. I looked on the floor, under the table, even under my bag. Still nothing. I asked him if he'd moved it so it wouldn't fall. He shook his head instantly. Nope, didn't touch it, he said, leaning forward like he was ready to help me look. He even patted the seat around him, crouched slightly to check under the table with me. That's when the low level panic started to creep in. My phone isn't just a phone. It's my wallet, my ID, my email, my bank. Losing it felt like losing my entire life. I retraced my steps to the bathroom just in case, scanning the floor the whole way. I asked the server if anyone had turned in a phone. Nothing. I checked my coat pockets. Nothing. When I came back, he was sipping his drink, looking around the diner like the culprit might still be sitting at another table. He said it was weird and maybe someone walked by and grabbed it. But that didn't make sense. The booth was against a wall, and the aisle was too far for someone to just reach in without me noticing. We searched for another 10 minutes. I started to feel lightheaded, both from the stress and from realizing that wherever my phone was, it wasn't in the building anymore. Finally, I decided I just needed to go home and use Find My Phone. He offered to walk me out and even said he could help me look outside. Something about the way he said it made me want to be alone. I told him I'd be fine. When I got home, I barely took off my coat before opening my laptop. My hands were still shaking as I logged into my account. And there it was, my phone's location. I expected to see it still at the diner, or maybe in some random alley if someone had grabbed it and ditched it. But no, a little blue dot was across town. In an apartment building. A building I recognized, because I'd seen it before, in the background of a selfie he'd sent me. It was his address. I stared at the map, zooming in, zooming out, trying to convince myself it wasn't exact. But it was. The blue dot was planted dead center in the middle of his unit. My stomach turned. I didn't text him. I didn't ask. I took a screenshot and showed my laptop. Then I drove straight to the police station. I showed them the screenshot and told them the whole story. They asked if I wanted to file a report, and I did. But they were quick to remind me they couldn't just storm into someone's apartment because my phone pinged there. If you can get more proof, one of them said, we can follow up. More proof? What did they want me to do? Knock on his door and ask for it back? The next morning, I opened Find My Phone again. The dot was still in his building. Same apartment. Same spot. It didn't move for hours. Around lunchtime, it went offline completely. 1 week later, I got an automated email saying my phone had been found. No explanation of how or who. It had been wiped, no contacts, no photos, no messages, nothing. Just a blank device with my old serial number attached. Basically useless. I don't know if the police ever spoke to him. I don't know if he was the one who took it or if he gave it to someone else. But I do know that after that day, he blocked me on every app we'd used to talk. I replaced the phone, changed every password I could remember, and now I keep it on me at all times. I don't care if I'm with friends, a date, or sitting in my own living room. It never leaves my side. And I still on that screenshot. Sometimes I open it and just stare at the little blue dot. The exact spot where my phone sat inside his apartment. And I think about the fact that I was sitting across from him, looking him in the eye while it was already gone. It was just dinner. That's all it was supposed to be. We met on an app, talked for maybe a week. She seemed normal enough, lighthearted, funny in that self-deprecating way people are when they're still feeling each other out. No over-the-top compliments, no red flag comments, nothing that made me think twice. She suggested this small Italian place near her side of town. I didn't think much of it, figured she was just picking somewhere she liked. I'd never been there before, but when I looked it up, it had great reviews and one of those dim, warm interiors where everything smells faintly of garlic and fresh bread. When I got there, she was already seated. We did the usual polite small talk, ordered wine, and I remember thinking, this is fine. Not amazing, but not bad either. The kind of date where you could go either way on seeing the person again. She asked a lot of questions, though. Not flirty, not vague, what do you do for fun kind of stuff. These were oddly specific. Where exactly did I live? How long had I been there? Was it an apartment or a house? Did I rent her own? What was my monthly payment? At the time, I chalked it up to curiosity. People talk about rent all the time, right? Maybe she was just comparing it to her own place. We ate, we paid, we stood outside in that awkward post-dinner moment where you're both deciding if you're going to linger or split. She said she had an early morning. I said I did too. We hugged, exchanged a "this was nice," and I headed to my car. The drive home was uneventful. I tossed my jacket on the couch, kicked off my shoes, and walked over to hang my keys on a hook by the door like I always do. That's when I noticed my house key was gone. I froze for a second, staring at the keyring. My car key was there. My building fob was there, but the single brass key for my front door, missing. At first, I thought maybe it had fallen off. The ring was a little loose where the metal overlapped. I patted down my pockets, checked the couch, checked the floor around the door. Nothing. I went back up to my car and searched the seats and the floorboards. Still nothing. I dumped my bag onto the counter, went through every pocket, every compartment. Empty. I told myself I'd probably just dropped it at the restaurant, maybe in the bathroom, maybe under the table. I sent her a quick text. Hey, random question. Can you check under the table where we were sitting? Think I might have dropped my house key. No reply. It was late, so I grabbed the spare I keep hidden outside and decided I'd deal with it in the morning. The next day started like any other. I made coffee, sat on the couch, scrolled through my phone. Then, somewhere between the news and a mindless scroll through social media, something caught my eye. On the local listings page for rentals right there in the new posts section was a photo of my living room. At first, I thought my brain was playing tricks on me. But no, it was my living room. The same couch. The same floor lamp. The same slightly crooked picture frame I keep meaning to fix but never do. The listing title read, Modern One-Bedroom Apartment for Rent. The description included my exact address. The price listed was just under what I actually pay, making it seem like an incredible deal to anyone browsing. And the username of the person who posted it, hers. I clicked on it. There were more pictures. My kitchen, my hallway, my bedroom. The shots weren't from the night before. The lighting was different in some, like they'd been taken during the day, which meant she'd been inside my place before. That's when the questions from dinner replayed in my head. The specifics. The way she leaned forward when I told her I rented. The faint little smile when I said the exact neighborhood. My stomach dropped. I called her. No answer. I texted, I know what you did. Seconds later, I was blocked. I reported the listing to this site, explaining that it was a scam and the photos were of my home. They said they'd look into it, but that didn't stop the thought from gnawing at me. She had a key. I went back over the night in my head. The only time she'd been near my keys was when I went to the bathroom. I left my jacket over the back of the chair. It would have taken seconds to slip the key off the ring and into her bag. By noon, I was at the hardware store buying a new lock. I changed it that same day. Later, a friend sent me a screenshot from a local Facebook rental group. A same listing had been reposted there, with people already commenting things like, wow, this is a great price. And is it still available? That was the worst part, realizing that strangers might actually show up at my building thinking they were coming for a viewing. I kept expecting a knock at my door from someone holding a printout of the listing. For the next week, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me tense. I double-checked the deadbolt every night. I never heard from her again. The listing eventually disappeared. I don't know if anyone ever handed over money thinking they were renting my place, but I do know I'll never leave my keys unattended on first date again. Now, before I walk out of any restaurant, before I even get to my car, I touch my keys. I count them. Because the worst part wasn't just that she tried to rent out my apartment. It was that she'd been inside it before I even knew she had the chance. It started off like a regular first date. We'd only been talking for maybe a week and a half, mostly casual texting, a few voice notes here and there, nothing deep. He seemed eager, not in a red flag, desperate way at first, just the kind of eager that comes from someone who's tired of messaging and wants to meet in person. We settled on dinner at a mid-range place in the city, not too fancy, not too cheap. Busy enough that the background noise would save us from any awkward silences, but not so crowded we'd be shouting over each other. When I arrived, he was already standing near the entrance. He spotted me immediately, breaking into this wide, almost exaggerated smile. The kind of smile you put on for a photo, not for greeting someone you just met in person for the first time. It threw me off a little, but I smiled back. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started talking. At first, it was fine. He told me about his work, something in sales, though he talked about it with a kind of practiced enthusiasm that made me think he'd given this exact speech before. He mentioned his hobbies, his favorite movies, a few travel stories. It was okay. Nothing that made my pulse quicken, but not a disaster either. I noticed pretty early on that he didn't ask much about me. When he did, it felt almost like he was ticking off boxes rather than listening. Oh, that's nice. And then right back to his own stories. I chalked it up to nerves. The food came. I remember thinking we'd probably wrap things up in another 30 minutes, maybe an hour tops. I'd go home deciding I wanted a second date, and that would be that. I didn't know the night was about to veer so far off the rails. Out of nowhere, he set his fork down and said, "Wait a second." His tone was strange, firm, like he was about to make a point. Then he stood up. I thought he was heading to the bathroom. Instead, he walked to the middle of the restaurant and clapped his hands. Not once, multiple times. The sound was loud enough to cut through the chatter and clinking glasses. Heads started turning. People put down their forks. My stomach sank. I didn't even know why yet, but I could feel the heat rising up my neck. He started talking loudly about how we found each other, about how he didn't believe in wasting time. His voice carried across the room. The people in the booth next to me turned fully around to watch. And then, before I could fully process what was happening, he got down on one knee, right there in front of a room full of strangers. He was holding a small velvet box. He flipped it open to reveal a ring. I couldn't even take in the details because my brain had completely short-circuited. We were on our first date, and he was proposing marriage. Gasps floated through the air. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." A few people started pulling out their phones to record. I sat frozen. My hands were in my lap, gripping the fabric of my dress so hard my knuckles hurt. I couldn't move, couldn't even muster the awkward laugh that might have broken the tension. He kept talking, oblivious to the fact that my soul was trying to claw its way out of my body. "You're the one," he said. "I knew the moment I saw your profile. Life is too short to wait. Let's make it official." The words washed over me like static. My vision narrowed. Every muscle in my body was screaming to either get up and walk out or somehow melt into the floor. But I stayed there, stuck. The clapping from a few enthusiastic tables died quickly when people realized I wasn't jumping up to say yes. The silence that followed was worse than the attention. It felt like the air was thick, like everyone was holding their breath. He leaned forward slightly, still on one knee, and repeated himself, louder this time, "Will you marry me?" I could feel at least 3 different phone cameras pointed directly at me. My face was hot. My palms were slick. My throat was tight. I'm not ready," I muttered. My voice was so shaky I wasn't sure anyone heard me except him. The smile slid off his face instantly. His jaw tightened. Slowly, he closed the ring box, stood up, and returned to the table. The entire walk back, people's eyes followed him. I stared at the table, wishing I could disappear. He sat down, picked up his fork, and started pushing his food around without a word. The rest of the meal was brutal. I tried making small talk just to fill the void, but he gave short, clipped answers. The warmth from earlier was gone, replaced by this cold, simmering disappointment. When the check came, he paid for it in silence. Then he asked if I wanted a ride home. "No, thanks," I said quickly. Outside, the night air felt different. Sharp, almost unreal, like the world had tilted a few degrees without me noticing. I walked to my car, feeling like I just stepped out of a bad improv sketch where everyone else knew the script but me. That night, I blocked his number. I lay in bed replaying the scene over and over, the clapping, the heads turning, the phones recording. Somewhere out there's probably a video of me sitting frozen at a table while a man I barely knew poured out a grand romantic speech meant for a proposal that should have happened, if ever, months or years down the line. The thought still makes my stomach twist. Now, whenever I see one of those viral public proposal videos online, I think about how different it feels when you're the person on the receiving end. When the surprise isn't joy, but dread. When the question isn't a dream come true, but a trap you have to escape with your dignity intact. And I think about that restaurant, and how it'll never just be a place to get dinner for me again. I didn't even plan on seeing her that night. We'd only been on one date before, a quick dinner at a pub downtown. It was fine. Nothing amazing, but nothing bad enough to write off completely. If I'm being honest, I figured it would just fade out like most short-lived app matches do. You meet once, trade a few texts afterward, then slowly stop replying until both of you silently move on. So when my phone buzzed late one evening with her name on the screen, I didn't expect much. Her first message was short. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" I assumed it was something normal. Maybe she needed me to pick something up on my way over, or she'd locked herself out of her apartment. But then she added, kind of urgent. I need someone with a car. I asked if everything was okay. She replied, yeah, just need help getting rid of some stuff. Tonight. It was a Tuesday. I had nothing going on. Against my better judgment, I said sure. When I pulled up outside her building, she came out almost immediately, hood up over her head, hands gripping the straps of a big, heavy-looking black duffel bag. She moved quickly, like she didn't want to be seen. She slid into the passenger seat and closed the door without even saying hello. Start driving, she said. No smile, no small talk, just to go. I asked where, and she said, I'll tell you on the way. I pulled out into the street, glancing at her every few seconds. The bag was on her lap, and she kept her hands resting on it like she was afraid it might shift or tip over. That's when she started explaining. Or at least, what she thought counted as explaining. She said she needed to get rid of some stuff, and that it was kind of sensitive. I tried to joke, you know how sketchy that sounds, right? But she didn't even crack a smile. She just kept glancing down at the bag. Then she dropped it. It's evidence, she said. I honestly thought she was messing with me. Who just announces that to someone they barely know? She must have read the disbelief on my face because she added, from a break-in, not mine. I'm just holding on to it for someone. I felt my grip on the steering wheel tighten. She went on like she was telling me about a Netflix show she'd watched. Casual, a little dramatic, but not worried. She said the guy who did the break-in had been panicking lately and wanted the stuff gone. Now it was on her to make it disappear. I asked what exactly was in the bag. She looked at me, dead serious, and said, stuff that can't be found. No more details. My brain started playing an unhelpful guessing game. Stolen electronics, jewelry, tools. Something worse. Every time I looked at that duffel bag, my stomach tightened a little more. She gave me turn-by-turn directions, guiding us farther and farther out of the city. Streetlights grew sparse. Businesses thinned out into dark stretches of road, broken up by patches of woods and abandoned looking lots. Eventually, she told me to take a right onto a narrow road I didn't even know existed. No lines painted on the pavement, no sidewalks, just trees pressing in on either side. We drove for another minute before she said, here, pull over. I stopped next to a dirt trail that cut into the trees. The only light came from my headlights, and even that didn't reach far into the woods. She unzipped her hoodie a little, adjusted her grip on the bag, and opened the door. Wait here, she said. Then she stepped out and disappeared into the dark. I sat there with the engine running, staring straight ahead. My dashboard clock ticked louder than usual. I could hear every little sound outside. The faint rustle of leaves, a car passing in the distance, the low thump of my own heartbeat in my ears. 5 minutes passed, then 10. By 15, my nerves were buzzing. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights pulling up behind me. I pictured a cop car, or worse, a van full of people looking for the same bag she was carrying. Just as I was starting to think about driving off, I saw movement. She emerged from the trees, empty-handed. She got back in, shut the door, and buckled her seatbelt like she'd just stepped out to take a phone call. It's done, she said, as if that explained anything. We turned around and headed back toward the city. The silence was thick. She didn't seem tense, though. If anything, she looked lighter, like she'd just crossed something off a to-do list. Every so often, she hummed to herself, a tuneless little noise that made my skin prickle. When we pulled up outside her building, she smiled for the first time that night. Thanks, she said. I owe you one. I didn't ask any more questions. The second she shut the door, I drove off, not speeding, but not lingering either. When I got home, I sat in my parked car for a good minute, just letting the quiet settle. My hands still felt tight on the steering wheel. I thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe even the police, but what would I even say? Hi, I just drove a woman I barely known to the woods so she could get rid of a mystery bag she called evidence. No, I don't know what was in it. No, I don't know exactly where she put it. So I didn't call anyone. I just went upstairs, locked my door, and blocked her number. And now, whenever I think about that night, I wonder if I was just an alibi without realizing it. If someone asked her later where she was at that time, she could say she'd been with me, on a date, driving around. And the worst part is, I'd have confirmed it, because I still don't know exactly what I helped her get rid of. I swear I wasn't planning on going back to his place. We'd only been on a couple of dates, and I'm not beyond rushing that stuff. but the night had been going fine. Casual drinks at a low-key bar, good conversation, nothing weird. And when he offered to make me a coffee before I called my ride, I figured why not. His place was just a small house on a quiet street. Inside, it was surprisingly clean, but not in a show-home way, more like someone who actually kept on top of things. Neutral walls, simple furniture, a couple of plants. The kind of place you wouldn't think twice about. He went into the kitchen to start the coffee, and I asked to use the bathroom. He pointed down the hall. The hallway was short, maybe 3 doors. The first one was clearly the bathroom, but the light was off and the door was open. I stepped in, but as I came back out, I accidentally grabbed the wrong handle on the opposite side. The door opened, and I froze. It was a bedroom, but not like any bedroom I'd ever seen. The air felt still, like no one had opened that door in a long time, and the first thing I saw was a figure sitting in the corner. At first, my brain thought it was a person. It was only when I stepped back and focused that I realized it was a doll, but not a normal doll. This thing was human-sized. The skin was hyper-realistic. The hair looked like it had been rooted strand by strand, and the eyes were glassy but unnervingly lifelike. Then I noticed there wasn't just one. There were 5 of them all around the room, each sitting in different positions. One in a chair by the window, one propped up on the bed, 2 standing against the far wall. And they were all dressed like me. Not just vaguely similar. The same style. The same kind of jacket I was wearing that night. The same hairstyle. Even accessories that looked like ones I owned. One had my exact scarf. Another had the same boots I'd worn on our first date. My chest tightened. I don't know how long I stood there, but every second made my stomach feel heavier. The room was silent, but it felt crowded. Their faces all had that blank, frozen expression, but the more I looked, the more I felt like they were watching me. I took a step back into the hall, my hand still on the doorknob. That's when I heard his voice from the kitchen, calling out to ask if I wanted sugar. I tried to answer casually, but my voice came out tight. I closed the door slowly and walked back toward the kitchen, forcing my face into something neutral. He was pouring the coffee into 2 mugs, acting completely normal. I sat at the counter, my mind racing with whether to ask him about it. But I didn't. I just drank half the coffee, made up some excuse about needing to get up early, and called my ride. He didn't push back, didn't ask questions, just smiled and said we'd hang out again soon. When I got home, I blocked his number without saying a word. I still think about that room sometimes. Not just the fact that he had those dolls, but how they were dressed, how specific they were, how much detail went into making them look like me, and how many more rooms like that he might have. I took a careful step back, still holding the doorknob. My mind was scrambling for a rational explanation. Maybe he collected them, maybe it was just a creepy coincidence, but the details were too specific. That's when I heard his voice from the kitchen. Do you want sugar in yours? I jumped slightly, my heart thudding against my ribs. My throat felt dry. I tried to answer casually, but my voice came out tight. No, thanks. Closing that door felt harder than it should have. I did it slowly, almost afraid to make a sound, and walked back toward the kitchen. He was standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, smiling like nothing was wrong, like there wasn't a shrine of lifelike copies of me just a few steps away. I sat on one of the stools, trying to keep my face neutral. My mind kept replaying the image of those dolls, their clothes, their hair. I wanted to ask him about them, but I couldn't think of a way to bring it up without giving away that I'd been in there. Instead, I wrapped my hands around the mug and took a sip. The coffee was strong, bitter. I kept my eyes on the table, not trusting my expression. After a few sips, I forced a polite smile and said, I should get going. I have an early morning tomorrow. He didn't seem disappointed. He just nodded, walked me to the door, and said we'd hang out again soon. I stepped outside, feeling the cool air hit my face, and called my ride from the sidewalk. I didn't want to wait inside. The moment I got home, I blocked his number. I've never told anyone exactly what I saw in that room. How much detail there was. How exact the replicas were. How many hours someone would have to spend studying me, my clothes, my hair, my accessories, to make them that accurate. Sometimes I wonder if those were the only ones. If maybe, somewhere else in his house, there's another room I didn't open. And maybe in that room, there's one more doll, dressed in exactly what I was wearing that night. It was supposed to just be coffee. That's all I signed up for, nothing more. We'd only been messaging for about a week. She seemed normal, friendly, quick with replies, never overshared, and didn't push for anything too personal. A couple of jokes here and there, a little harmless flirting, but nothing that set off alarm bells. She was the one who suggested we meet in person. Said she knew a little independent cafe she liked. Quiet, good coffee, cozy atmosphere. It was midday on a Saturday. Bright daylight, people around, public setting. The kind of safe first meeting you're supposed to have. When I got there, she was already at a table by the big front window, scrolling through her phone. She saw me come in, smiled, and waved me over. She looked exactly like her pictures. Same hair, same smile, same green sweater I had seen in one of her profile shots. I ordered my drink, made small talk with the barista, then sat down across from her. At first, it was exactly what I expected. We chatted about work, hobbies, weekend routines. She told me about this yoga class she liked. I told her about a hiking trail I'd been exploring. She was easy to talk to. I thought, okay, this is going all right. But about 20 minutes in, I noticed her glance toward the door. Not like she was distracted, more like she was waiting for something. It wasn't once or twice. She kept checking like she was timing something in her head. I figured maybe she was expecting a friend to pass by or she had somewhere to be after this. I kept the conversation going, but I could feel her attention flicking back and forth between me and the entrance. Then it happened. The cafe door swung open and this little kid, maybe 6 years old, ran straight in. No hesitation, no looking around, just a beeline across the room. And they headed right for our table. Before I could even process it, the kid was hugging her leg. And they turned to me, big smile, eyes bright, and yelled, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear, "Daddy." The word hit me like a punch to the chest. My first thought was, this is a mistake. I looked at her immediately, expecting the obvious correction. No, sweetie, this isn't Daddy. Some embarrassed laugh, maybe an apology. But she didn't do any of that. She smiled. Not awkwardly, not nervously, just a calm, almost content smile, like this was exactly how she'd hoped it would go. Then she said, "I was wondering when you'd meet." Meet? Not meet him. Not meet this nice man. Just meet, like we'd been building to this moment for a while. I sat there frozen, completely blindsided, as the kid climbed into the chair next to me. They started asking questions right away. If I wanted to split a muffin with Daddy, what was in my coffee? I didn't even know how to react. I was still trying to get my brain to catch up with what was happening. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize for springing this on me. She just shifted into some casual, domestic tone like this was a normal Saturday morning for all of us. She ordered the kid a hot chocolate without even looking at me, like we'd been doing this for years. Every time she spoke to the kid, she used my name, and she kept dropping little phrases. Daddy likes this, or Daddy probably does that. Like she was weaving me into some script she'd written in her head. It was surreal. The more I sat there, the more I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. She had planned for me to meet her child today without telling me. More than that, she'd clearly prepped the kid for it. Because the kid wasn't confused. Not even a little. They weren't shy. They didn't act like they were meeting a stranger for the first time. They leaned in close to me, talked to me like they already knew me, even mentioned things I hadn't told them, like my favorite snack or the fact that I like hiking. Things I'd only mentioned in messages with her. That's when my stomach knotted. It wasn't about the kid. I don't have anything against kids, but this felt calculated. I had been cast in a role I hadn't auditioned for. I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, but didn't drink much. I tried to keep my face neutral while my brain was screaming. What's happening? I gave it a few minutes, trying to decide whether to say something or just leave. But I could feel her watching me like she was gauging my reaction, testing how I'd handle it. That made my skin crawl even more. Finally, I stood up and said I needed to use the bathroom. She nodded like it was nothing. Instead of turning toward the back, I walked straight out the front door. I didn't run, but my pace picked up fast. My heart was hammering by the time I reached my car. I got in, started the engine, and drove without looking back. About 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was her. "Kerr, why did you leave like that?" I didn't answer. 10 minutes after that, another text. "Kerr, it's important to be a man and step up. Don't be a coward." That one made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. The implication wasn't subtle. I blocked her number that night. For days afterward, I kept replaying the scene in my head, the timing of it. The way she kept looking at the door before the kid came in. The fact that the kid wasn't surprised at all. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered how many times she'd done this before. If I was the first daddy, or just the latest in a line of strangers she'd slotted into that role for an afternoon. And somewhere out there, a kid might already have a list of daddies in their head, a blur of different faces they've been told are family, at least until the next coffee date. I knew pretty quickly something was off, but it didn't hit me just how weird it was until the third time he slipped. We'd met on an app a few weeks earlier. Messaging was fine. No love bombing, no cringe pickup lines. If anything, he came across as normal, maybe a little forward about wanting to meet in person. I chalked that up to enthusiasm. After all, what's the point of staying in the chat stage forever? He suggested dinner at a Mexican place downtown. Public location, decent reviews, and well lit enough that I wouldn't feel trapped. I agreed. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting near the window with a drink in front of him. He stood up, gave a polite hello, and we did that awkward half hug that first dates sometimes require. The first few minutes were unremarkable. We talked about where we grew up, the usual weather small talk, work. I learned he did something vaguely tech-related, the kind of job description that sounds like it could mean anything. He asked about my job, and I told him the bare basics. I've always been careful not to overshare on first dates. Then came the first slip. Mid-conversation, he casually mentioned how my apartment was cute but small, and that my kitchen didn't get much light in the morning. It was such an oddly specific comment that it made me pause mid-sip. I forced a smile, but my brain immediately started flipping through our past conversations like a Rolodex. I'd never described my apartment, not in texts, not on the app, not even vaguely. Maybe it was a lucky guess, I told myself. A lot of apartments in the city are small and don't get much natural light. I let slide and went back to eating. About 20 minutes later, while we were talking about jobs, he dropped another one. Must be a pain on rainy days with that long walk to the station, he said casually, like we'd already discussed it 100 times. This time, I didn't laugh it off. I blinked at him, trying to remember if I'd ever mentioned commuting by train. I hadn't. In fact, I was sure I hadn't told him anything about my route to work, let alone that the walk to the station was longer than average. How do you know that? I asked, keeping my voice light. He shrugged, not even looking up from his plate. Just an assumption. You look like the type who commutes. That didn't make sense. Not just the answer, the tone. The way he brushed it off so quickly, like he was ready for me to question it. I started to feel that creeping discomfort you can't quite hide. My shoulders were tense. My fork slowed down. I caught myself glancing at the door and the time more often than I should have. Then came the third slip, the one that made my stomach drop. We were talking about coffee, swapping opinions on local spots, when he smirked and said, "Bet you always get the caramel latte with oat milk from that place on 7th. My brain stopped. I had never told him my coffee order. I had never even mentioned that cafe to him. The only way he could know that was if he had seen me get it. More than once. I stared at him, and for the first time that night, I didn't bother to hide my reaction. He just grinned like it was no big deal. The rest of the night blurred after that. I barely touched my plate. Every sentence out of his mouth felt like a thread I didn't want to pull. My apartment layout, my commute, my coffee order. None of those were things you could guess from an online profile. And then other moments from the past week started replaying in my mind. That weird prickling feeling I had walking home one evening like someone was behind me. I told myself it was nothing because it was dark and I didn't want to feel paranoid. Or that random morning when I noticed a car idling near my building. I'd assumed they were waiting for someone. What if it had been him? At some point, he noticed I'd gone quieter. He asked if I was tired. I said I had an early morning, a complete lie, and he offered to walk me home. The thought of him knowing exactly where I lived made my chest tighten. I told him I was meeting a friend after dinner. Another lie. I just wanted distance between us. We split the bill, and as soon as we stepped outside, I made up a quick "my friend's already here" story and walked in the opposite direction of my apartment. I kept my pace steady until I turned a corner, then sped up. I didn't look back until I was a couple of blocks away. I didn't see him. When I got home, I went through all of our messages, looking for anything I might have said that could explain those details. Nothing. He couldn't have gotten them from me. That's when I blocked him. Phone, app, everywhere. For the next few days, though, blocking him didn't feel like enough. I kept checking over my shoulder on my walk to the station. Every time I ordered my caramel latte, I scanned the street for that same parked car. I didn't see him again. But I still wonder how long he'd been watching me before we ever met. You know that moment when you're on a date and something gets said that instantly makes you rethink your entire night? Yeah, that happened to me. We matched online about a week before. She seemed nice enough. Profile full of books stacked on a bedside table, a couple of artsy black and white shots of her in coffee shops, a photo of her hiking somewhere green and misty. She worked in graphic design, preferred quiet cafes to bars, and had a thing for indie movies. I figured she was probably one of those low-drama, introverted types. Conversation over the app was fine. Not fireworks, not awkward silence, just steady and pleasant. She was responsive without being clingy, a little witty, and didn't overshare. So when she suggested grabbing dinner, I said yes. She picked a place, a small Italian spot downtown. Not the kind of dimly lit, romantic place where you feel pressure to perform, but not casual enough to feel like a cafeteria either. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a table in the far corner. She stood when she saw me, smiling, and that's when I noticed the necklace. It was silver, a chain fine enough to almost disappear against her skin. The pendant was small, maybe an inch long, shaped like a narrow capsule. Not a locket, not a gemstone. Something sturdier, almost like a mini perfume vial, only there was no visible way to open it. People wear weird jewelry all the time, so I didn't think much of it. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started talking. She was animated in that warm, intentional way, leaning forward slightly, nodding while I spoke, laughing at my smaller jokes. It felt like the kind of first date where you think, okay, this could go somewhere. At one point, she reached up to adjust the pendant, pinching it between her fingers like she was making sure it was still there. She held it for just a beat too long. "That's your favorite necklace?" I asked, just making conversation. She smiled and said, "It's my most important possession. I never take it off." I expected the follow-up to be about her grandmother giving it to her, or maybe a piece she'd bought while traveling. Instead, she said, "It has my ex's ashes in it." I must have blinked too slowly because she went right on talking. Not in a hushed, emotional way, but like she was telling me she had a cat named Oliver. She explained that her ex had passed away 2 years ago, and she'd had some of his ashes sealed inside the pendant so she could keep him close. She wore it everywhere, to work, to bed, in the shower. My instinct was to nod politely, and I did, but something about the casual way she said it made my brain stutter. Then she added, "I talk to him every night before bed." Not like a quick good night in her head. No, she described it as an actual conversation. She'd tell him about her day, her thoughts, her feelings. Sometimes, she said, she'd ask him questions and imagine his answers. I smiled politely, but my mind was trying to reframe the entire evening. This wasn't a moment of emotional vulnerability she'd been working up to. This was just normal to her. From that point on, I kept glancing at the necklace, not in a judgmental way. Grief is grief, but because I couldn't stop picturing it. The thought that there were human remains inside something hanging inches from me made the air at the table feel heavier. She noticed me looking and tapped the pendant lightly. "Some people think it's creepy," she said, "but I think it's romantic, like he's still with me." I asked carefully, "Do you wear it on dates a lot?" She shrugged. "I wear it everywhere. If someone's going to be in my life, they need to be okay with him being part of it. This way he can. Approve." "Approve," I repeated. She grinned, not joking, and said, "I can tell when he likes someone." I don't know what expression was on my face at that moment, but I know my fork paused halfway to my mouth. Dinner went on like that. She told me in detail about the night he died, some accident, though I didn't press for specifics, and how she'd slept on the couch for months afterward because their bed felt too empty. She said the necklace made her feel anchored and that, in a way, she was still in a relationship. The food tasted bland after that. I couldn't focus on anything but that pendant in her hand brushing over it every so often. When the check came, she insisted on splitting it. We stepped outside into the quiet street. She lingered, fingers wrapped around the pendant like she was holding someone's hand. "I had a nice time," she said. And I think he likes you. That line did something to my chest. It wasn't angry or sarcastic, but hearing that he, a man who no longer existed in the physical sense, had an opinion about me was unsettling in a way I couldn't fully articulate. I mumbled something vague about also having a good time, then headed for my car. When I got inside, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there staring at the steering wheel, processing the fact that a first date had somehow become a three-person dinner. I wasn't judging her for grieving. Grief is messy, illogical, and deeply personal. But it was too much too soon. There's a difference between honoring someone's memory and still building your whole life around them. When I got home, I saw a message from her. I had fun tonight. He did too. I didn't reply. I didn't block her immediately, but I knew there wasn't going to be a second date. That was the first and last time I saw her and him. "2 weeks, that's all it had been. Not even 14 proper days of knowing this guy. And most of that wasn't even in person. Just texting late at night, swapping memes during lunch breaks, the occasional how's your day going, kind of check-in. We met on a dating app, nothing serious at first. His profile had this mix of sarcastic humor and overconfidence that can either be charming or unbearable, depending on the person. In texts, he was funny, quick with comebacks, a little intense at times, but I told myself that was just his way of showing interest. We only met once before. Coffee on a Sunday afternoon, it was fine. Not awkward enough to be a disaster, but not smooth enough to feel like instant chemistry either. He talked a lot, more about himself than anything, but I chalked it up to first date nerves. The second time, he suggested we grab dinner. He picked a small burger place downtown. Low-key public casual. I figured that if things got weird, I could just say I had to wake up early. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He was sitting in a booth against the wall like he claimed the spot with the best view of the whole place. The second he saw me, his face lit up, but not in the normal, hey, nice to see you way. This was bigger, wider, like I was the person he'd been waiting to see all day. I slid into the booth across from him. His energy was almost humming, like he was about to tell me something he'd been dying to say but was holding back just long enough to build suspense. We started with small talk, work updates, TV shows we were watching, the usual safe territory. I tried to ignore the way his eyes kept darting toward my hands, my hair, my face, like he was mentally taking notes. Then, somewhere between bites of fries and sipping my drink, his whole posture changed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, like he was about to share a secret. "I've been working on something," he said, grinning. I smiled back, expecting this to be some inside joke or maybe a playlist he made or a drawing, something harmless. Instead, he rolled up his sleeve. Right there on his forearm, in bold black ink, was my name. Not a nickname. Not initials, my full first name, spelled perfectly. The skin around it was still a little red, slightly shiny in that way fresh tattoos look when they're healing. I froze. My fork was halfway in my mouth, and it stayed there. My eyes locked on those blocky letters, and for a few seconds, the restaurant noise around us faded out completely. He was grinning, waiting for my reaction, clearly expecting something along the lines of shock turned to flattery. I tried to keep my voice steady. "That's my name." "Yeah," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Pretty cool, right? Got it a couple days ago." "A couple of days ago," I repeated. "Yeah," he said again, shrugging like this was no big deal. "I've been thinking about it for a while. Just felt right, you know? I knew I wouldn't regret it." I couldn't stop staring. It wasn't even a small, discreet tattoo you have to squint to see. This was big enough to read from across the table, and the font wasn't anything soft or subtle. It was bold, solid lettering. Statement ink, meant to be seen. My stomach tightened. We had known each other for 2 weeks. We had one coffee date. This wasn't a slow burn romance building towards some grand gesture. This was a man deciding to permanently brand himself with my name after 13 days and maybe 5 hours of in-person conversation. He kept talking, words tumbling out faster now. How it felt right. How have you been planning to surprise me with it later but couldn't wait any longer? How have you liked the idea that no matter what happened, I'd always be part of him? I tried to swallow the growing lump in my throat. I wanted to keep the peace to not cause a scene, but my mind was running in tight circles. This wasn't romantic. This was obsessive. The rest of my food went cold. My appetite had switched off completely. I threw out short, non-committal responses while he kept explaining his commitment, as if we already decided we were something. When the plates were cleared, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk. I told him I had to get home. He had offered to drive me, but I insisted on walking, even though the wind outside was sharp and cold. I just needed space from him, from that booth, from the idea that my name was now permanently etched into someone's skin after barely 2 weeks of knowing me. I walked quickly, turning corners without looking back. My phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Pretty awesome, right? Followed by a photo of the tattoo again, this time with a smiley face emoji. No other words, just my name staring back at me from his arm, now on my phone screen. I didn't reply. That night I told a friend. She didn't believe me at first, thought I was exaggerating. I had to describe the exact lettering and placement before she finally went quiet and said, "Oh my God." 2 days later, another message popped up from him. This one was longer. "I hope you appreciate the commitment. This means something special to me." That was it for me. I blocked his number, blocked him on the app, made sure my social media settings were locked down tight. But even after that, the thought stuck with me. The knowledge that somewhere out there, this man still has my name on his arm. That strangers might see it and ask him about it. That he might tell them I'm someone I'm not. And that's the part that really gets under my skin. I barely knew him, but he decided I was worth marking himself for life. I have no idea if he's told anyone else the story. No idea if they know it's me. But I do know this: 2 weeks is more than enough time for someone to show you exactly how weird they can get. I thought it was going to be a pretty normal night. We'd been messaging for a couple of weeks after meeting through a mutual friend. Nothing too deep, just casual back and forth, the occasional joke, and a few "what do you like to cook" conversations. She mentioned she loved making meals from scratch and suggested we cook dinner together sometime. She offered her place, said she'd handle most of the ingredients, and told me to bring dessert. It sounded straightforward enough. It was just after dark when I pulled up to her building. The street was quiet except for a single car rolling by, headlights briefly sweeping across the front. The hallway inside was even quieter. A couple of dim wall sconces gave the place this low, warm light, but the air had that stillness that made you feel like you were the only one there. When I knocked, I expected her to swing the door open with a hello. Instead, her voice came from inside. "Come in." I stepped in and shut the door behind me. Her apartment was one of those open layout spaces where the living room and kitchen were connected. I could see the whole setup from where I stood. Table set, ingredients laid out, wine glasses waiting. She wasn't in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table. And in front of her was a large hunting knife. Not a chef's knife. Not a paring knife. One of those heavy, fixed-blade ones with a thick black handle and a leather sheath lying next to it. She was holding a sharpening rod in one hand, dragging the blade along it slowly over and over. The sound, a low metallic scrape, cut through the quiet room. Every few passes, the blade caught the light, flashing for a second before going dull again. I stood there in a moment longer than I should have, holding the paper bag with dessert. My brain couldn't quite decide if I should laugh, ask why, or pretend I didn't notice. She didn't look up right away, just kept running the blade against the rod in a rhythm that was deliberate, like she'd been doing it for a while before I arrived. When she'd finally glanced at me, she smiled like this was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Hey, just keeping busy while I waited." She set the sharpening rod down, flipped the knife in her hand with surprising ease, and placed it carefully on the table next to her plate. I walked into the kitchen area, setting the dessert down on the counter. My eyes kept going back to it. This wasn't for slicing onions or mincing garlic. The blade was thick, the point tapered to a needle, designed for skinning or cutting through bone. She stood and started pulling ingredients from the fridge. "You can help with chopping if you want," she said, handing me a cutting board and a regular kitchen knife. I noticed she kept the hunting knife in her line of sight. At one point, she moved it from the table to the counter, closer to where she was stirring something on the stove. Her free hand rested lightly on the handle, almost like muscle memory. The conversation stayed light for a while, but every so often, she threw in a question that stuck out. "What would you do if someone broke into your place? Ever killed anything, like hunting?" No laugh after. No, just kidding. Just a small smile. then back to measuring out spices. I found myself glancing at the clock more than I should have. By the time we sat down to eat, the knife was back on the table again, this time nearer to her plate than the bread basket. She didn't touch it, didn't even look at it much, but I couldn't stop tracking it with my eyes. The way you keep track of a spider on the wall, not because it's doing anything yet, but because you need to know where it is. Dinner itself was good. The food, I mean. The atmosphere was something else entirely. Every scrape of my fork against the plate seemed too loud in the space between us. When we were done, she stood to clear the plates. I turned to grab the dessert, and when I looked back, she was holding the knife again. Not waving it around, not doing anything overt, just sliding it back into its sheath. The sound of leather against steel was soft but sharp enough to crawl up my spine. She set it on the counter, right at the edge, then leaned her weight onto her hands and looked at me. Want to stay for a movie? I shook my head. I've got an early morning tomorrow. She didn't press, just shrugged and started rinsing dishes, the sheath still within reach. As I was putting on my jacket, she called over her shoulder. We should do this again sometime. I have other knives you might like to see. I forced a small laugh, said something non-committal, then left. Walking back to my car, I realized I still had the dessert bag in my hand, untouched. The night air felt sharper than it should have, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder even though the street was empty. I didn't look back at her window. I never texted her after that, and she never reached out either. But for weeks afterward, anytime I heard that metallic scrape sound, in a movie on TV, even in a YouTube cooking video, my stomach would tighten. I'd be right back in that warm, quiet apartment, watching her run that blade against steel over and over, a knife she didn't need for anything we were about to cook. I knew something felt off within the first 5 minutes, but I couldn't put my finger on it. We'd been talking for about 2 weeks before meeting up. Nothing heavy, mostly late-night messages, the occasional photo, a weird street sign, or a funny video. He worked odd hours, so there was a gap between replies sometimes, but when he did respond, it was worth it. He had this dry humor that made everything sound like a low-key anecdote from some strange, eventful life. We'd built a rhythm, little inside jokes, half-finished stories, playful jabs about each other's music taste. The plan was simple, a casual dinner at a mid-range Italian place, the kind where you can linger without a server hovering. I figured it'd be the natural next step. See if the same spark from our messages existed in person. When I walked in, I spotted him right away. Same dark jacket from his profile picture, same sharp jawline, same short, neatly combed hair. He was sitting at a small 2-person table near the back, facing the entrance. I gave a quick wave. He smiled, just enough to be polite, but didn't stand up. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just nerves. I crossed the room, slid into the chair across from him, and sat my bag down. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he replied, and it felt muted. Right away, the conversation felt different. Not bad exactly, just thinner, like someone had turned the volume down on his personality. He didn't bring up any of the running jokes we'd been trading for days. He stuck to safe questions. How was my day? Where do I usually eat around here? Had I tried their pasta before? I tried steering us back into familiar territory. I mentioned a meme he'd sent me the night before, expecting at least a smirk. Nothing. Just a blink and a slow nod. I told a quick version of a story I already shared over text, assuming he'd tease me for retelling it. Instead, he reacted like he was hearing it for the first time. It wasn't just forgetfulness. It was something about his eyes. He wasn't listening the way someone listens when they already like you. He was watching me, studying me, like every word was a clue. We ordered. I was halfway through a sentence about work when I caught it. The faintest shift in his expression. A smile, but not for me. The kind of smile people give when they're thinking about something else entirely. That's when it hit me. The resemblance was too perfect for this to be coincidence, but something was undeniably wrong. The eyes were the same shape, same color, but the gaze was different. The way he held himself was different. This wasn't my date. Identical twin. It had to be. Same build, same face, even the same jacket. But the personality, the rhythm, was missing. It felt like putting on a favorite sweatshirt and realizing it smelled like someone else. My mind started running scenarios. Maybe my date bailed and thought it'd be hilarious to send his brother in his place. Maybe his brother had just shown up for some unknown reason. Either way, I was halfway through a breadstick with a man I had never agreed to meet. I didn't confront him right away. I just watched. The differences kept stacking up. The laugh didn't match. He used turns of phrase my date never did. And when I really looked, I noticed the absence. No faint scar near his temple, the one I had spotted in photos. At one point, he excused himself to the bathroom. My hands were damp against my water glass. I considered just grabbing my bag and leaving, but curiosity won. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. Hey, are you almost here? A minute later, the screen lit up. Had a last-minute thing. Couldn't make it. You're in good hands, though. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just those 7 words. The air around me seemed to change. The chatter of nearby tables faded into a dull hum. My skin prickled. I wasn't scared exactly, but the weight of what was happening pressed down on me. The knowledge that 2 people had decided I didn't need to know the truth until I was already sitting there. When he came back, he glanced at my phone before sitting. Not at me. At the phone. He didn't ask if I'd heard from his brother. He just gave me that same polite smile, as if we were both in on some secret. The rest of the meal felt like a test. He asked more personal questions. Subtle, but direct. Childhood stuff, relationship stuff, little details you wouldn't ask on a first date unless you were trying to build a profile of someone. And I couldn't shake the feeling that my answers weren't for him. I barely touched my food after that. I waited for the right pause, then leaned back and said I had an early morning. He didn't argue, didn't try to prolong it. He just nodded slowly, like he finished taking whatever mental notes he'd come for. Outside, the cool air hit me like a reset. I muttered a quick goodbye and walked to my car faster than I meant to. I could feel his eyes on me the whole way. He stayed by the restaurant door, hands in his pockets, head slightly tilted. I didn't look back once I reached the car, locked the doors before starting it. The drive home felt longer than it should have, every red light a little too still, every pedestrian glance just long enough to make me uneasy. When I finally got inside my apartment, I didn't take off my jacket right away. I stood in the hallway, phone in my hand, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I blocked them both. No explanation, no confrontation, just gone. And the worst part, sitting there in my kitchen with the silence pressing in, I realized something I hadn't thought about before. I still don't know which one messaged me first. I wasn't expecting anything weird. If anything, I thought it would be one of those forgettable first dates where you make polite conversation, maybe watch a movie, and part ways not entirely sure if you'll ever text again. We'd run into each other before at a little coffee shop near my work. She was the type who could sit alone with a book and somehow still end up chatting with the people around her. I liked her dry humor, the way she could throw a casual jab without sounding mean. So when she invited me over for dinner, it felt like a step forward. Relaxed, simple. She even mentioned she'd make pasta and open a bottle of wine. Her apartment was on the top floor of an old brick building, the kind with narrow hallways and faded patterned carpet that had been there for decades. As I walked down the corridor, the air smelled faintly of onions and something metallic like radiator heat. The floor creaked in places and the carpet was worn so thin in spots you could see bare wood peeking through. She opened the door with a wide smile, hair tied up, apron still on, and stepped aside to let me in. The place was small but warm. Mismatched furniture that somehow worked together, soft yellow lighting, a couple of framed prints on the walls. It felt lived in but not cluttered. I was shrugging off my jacket when I heard a faint jingling sound. A bell, maybe. Then, padding out from the hallway came a cat. Not just a cat, the cat. He was long-haired, gray with a neat white patch on his chest, one ear permanently folded at the tip. My stomach tightened instantly, because I knew this cat. Everyone in my neighborhood knew this cat. His name was Jasper. A few months back, Jasper had gone missing. His owner, Martin, was an older guy who lived 3 houses down from me. He plastered the whole street with flyers, a grainy photo of Jasper staring out a window. Really found in bold underneath. I'd helped him tape one to a lamppost outside my place. For weeks afterward, people kept an eye out. Jasper had been a neighborhood fixture. Friendly, fearless, always padding into people's yards for head scratches before wandering back home. Until one day he didn't. And now here he was in this woman's living room, looking perfectly healthy and more or less at home. She bent down, scooping him up with practiced ease. "This is Oliver," she said, scratching behind his ear. I've had him for about 3 months. 3 months. The same amount of time Jasper had been missing. I managed a polite smile, but something cold had started winding through my gut. While she moved into the kitchen to check on dinner, I crouched down beside the cat. He didn't seem startled by me. In fact, he leaned in, rubbing against my leg in that familiar way he used to when I saw him around the neighborhood. The bent ear, the white patch, even the faint little scar across his nose, it was all there. The idea that this could be some other, unrelated cat was laughable. I glanced around. There wasn't much in the way of cat stuff. A small litter box tucked in the corner, a plain stainless steel food bowl on the floor. No cat tree, no pile of toys, no worn-out scratching post. If she'd had him for years, you'd expect signs. Instead, it looked like someone had set up just enough to keep a cat fed and clean. Temporary accommodations. She came back with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, chatting about her day. I nodded along, but my thoughts were still looping over the same track. That's Jasper. That's Martin's cat. What the hell is he doing here? Halfway through dinner, she mentioned, almost casually, that she'd found Oliver one night near the park. Said he was skinny and meowing, so she took him home. There was something about the way she told it, brisk, like she'd rehearsed it. She didn't mention trying to find an owner. No. I put up a post online. No. I checked for a microchip. Just found kept. I tried to imagine Martin hearing this. Tried to imagine explaining it to him. My fork felt heavier in my hand. She offered dessert, but I said I should probably get going. She didn't seem disappointed, just gathered the plates while I put on my jacket. Jasper, Oliver, followed me to the door, brushing his tail on my calf. I looked down at him, and for a second I had the insane urge to scoop him up and leave right then. But I didn't. Because it was her apartment. Her cat, as far as anyone else knew, and I didn't have proof. Just a strong, gnawing certainty and a handful of shared memories from the neighborhood. The ride home was quiet except for the low hum of my car's heater. Every stoplight felt too long. I kept picturing Jasper in that apartment, lying on a couch that wasn't his, being called a name that wasn't his. She texted me the next morning, "Had a great time last night. Let's do it again soon." I stared at it for a long minute before locking my phone. I didn't reply, because I knew if I saw her again, it would end with me either confronting her or doing something reckless like walking out with the cat. Neither was a good idea. A week later, I was walking past Martin's place on my way to the store. The flyer was still taped to his mailbox, corners curling from rain. Jasper's face stared out from the faded print. Underneath, RDW found. I slowed down, thought about knocking. Thought about telling him everything. Her name, her address, what I'd seen. But then I pictured his face if I was wrong. Or worse, if I was right but couldn't back it up. So I kept walking. And the image stayed with me, Jasper, sitting in a warm apartment on the other side of town, looking out a window he didn't recognize, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. When someone says favorite spot, you picture a coffee shop you go to every Sunday morning, a quiet stretch of beach, maybe a scenic overlook with a view of the city lights. You don't picture what I saw that night. We'd met twice before, once at a friend's crowded house party where music thumped through the walls, and once for a quick lunch at a place near my office. Both times, he'd been a little awkward, but not in a creepy way. He was one of those quiet types who seemed to be thinking about what to say for longer than most people. I chalked it up to shyness. So when he texted asking if I wanted to hang out, I didn't hesitate at first. He said he wanted to take me to his favorite place, and that it was different. I figured he meant a hidden park or a nice spot by the river. He told me to dress warm and that he'd pick me up around 8. He pulled up in an old sedan that looked like it had seen more than a few winters. The interior smelled faintly of damp leaves and something metallic. There was a neatly folded blanket in the back seat and a small wicker picnic basket resting on the floor. I thought it was kind of sweet, old-fashioned even. It was already dark when we set out. Instead of heading toward downtown, we drove farther and farther away from the city. The streetlights thinned out, the buildings gave way to fields and clusters of trees. The road narrowed, the pavement cracked and patched in places. I finally asked where we were going. "You'll see," he said, eyes on the road. We turned onto an even smaller road that wound through the trees. A few minutes later, he slowed and pulled up next to a rusted iron gate. The headlights lit up rows of crooked stone markers behind it. It took me a second to process, but then I realized it was a graveyard. Not the manicured, flower-covered kind with tidy rows and a caretaker's shed. This was different. Old. Forgotten. The kind you find on the edge of nowhere, where the stones have been weathered down until the names are barely legible. Some leaned precariously, others had been half swallowed by weeds and brambles. He cut the engine and got out like it was the most normal thing in the world. He grabbed the blanket and the basket from the back seat, then waved for me to follow. Every instinct told me to stay in the car, lock the doors, and wait. But I didn't want to make it weird. I told myself maybe it was just unusual, not creepy. The air was cool and damp, smelling faintly of wet earth and moss. The only sounds were the hum of crickets and the occasional rustle from the undergrowth. The gate groaned when he pushed it open, and we stepped inside. We followed a narrow path lined with headstones, some so eroded they were little more than lumps of stone. Eventually, we reached a clearing where a massive, cracked stone cross stood in the center. It looked like it had been there for over a century. "This is it," he said, smiling slightly. He spread the blanket right there, half over a patch of uneven ground marked by small, flat stones. I hesitated before sitting down. Something about it felt wrong. Sitting on someone's grave while eating sandwiches, but I didn't say anything. He unpacked the basket, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a small container of fruit, and a thermos of tea. We ate in the dim light of a battery-powered lantern he pulled from his coat pocket. At first, he talked about how peaceful it was here, how the world felt far away, how he came to think to be with the quiet. Then he began pointing to certain graves, telling me who was buried there, or at least who he thought was. Some were so old the names were just faint scratches in the stone, but he had them memorized. He researched them, he said. I tried to smile politely, but there was something about the way he spoke, like these people weren't just names in a record, but acquaintances. Then his tone shifted. He started talking about how nice it would be to be buried here. At first, it sounded like a passing thought. Quiet, undisturbed, he said, sipping his tea. A place where time doesn't bother you anymore. I might have brushed it off, until he looked at me for just a beat too long and added, "It'd be even better if we were buried here together." The words hit me like cold water. I half laughed, hoping he was joking. But his face was calm and serious. He kept talking, describing the perfect spot, a little dip in the ground beneath an old willow tree at the far edge of the cemetery. He even pointed toward it in the dark, as if he'd already picked it out. The sandwich in my hand suddenly felt heavy. My appetite was gone. The blanket seemed smaller now, and I was aware of how close we were sitting. He went on about the connection people could have after death, how it didn't matter what came next as long as you weren't alone. His voice was soft, almost affectionate, but every word made the space around me feel tighter. I made up an excuse about having to be up early. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly and began packing up. The walk back felt longer. The path was darker, the headstones looming at odd angles like they were leaning in to watch us pass. Back in the car, the smell of damp leaves seemed stronger. The drive home was almost silent. Only once did he speak, saying, "We should come back during the day so you can see it properly." I murmured something non-committal, eyes fixed on the passing blur of trees outside my window. When we pulled up outside my place, I thanked him, automatic politeness, and got out quickly. He sat there for a moment before driving off. I watched the taillights disappear down the street, feeling a strange mixture of relief and lingering unease. The next day, he texted, "Want to go again next weekend?" I didn't reply. A few days later, another text came. This one had a photo attached, a grainy shot of the willow tree he pointed out in the dark, no caption. I blocked his number. I still don't know if he thought it was romantic or if there was something darker in the way he planned that night. But I do know this, I'll never get in a car with someone again without asking exactly where we're going first. It still feels strange even thinking about it. I've been on plenty of awkward dates, the kind you laugh about later with friends, but nothing that made me feel like I'd stepped into someone else's private nightmare. We met through a mutual friend who swore she was quirky but in a good way. The first time we hung out was at a casual bar downtown, the kind of place where you have to lean in to hear each other over the music. She was a little intense, talked fast, made unwavering eye contact, always seemed like she was holding back something bigger she wanted to say. But she was funny enough, sharp in a way that made the conversation move quickly. so I didn't mind. The second time we met, she suggested we skip the public setting and just hang out at her place. I'll cook something, she said. We'll have a couple of drinks, keep it low-key. Her building was older, with narrow hallways and creaky stairs that groaned underfoot. The air smelled faintly of incense and damp wood, not unpleasant, just heavy. Her studio apartment was small but organized, almost staged. Plants lined the windowsills, their leaves catching the last scraps of daylight. Odd, surreal art prints hung on the walls, distorted portraits, abstract shapes in violent colors. A wooden shelf was crammed with glass jars filled with dried herbs, each one neatly labeled in careful handwriting. It was the kind of apartment you could tell someone had curated for effect. Every object placed just so, the effortless vibe that actually takes hours to arrange. She offered me a glass of wine and headed into the small kitchenette. While she busied herself, I let my eyes wander. Crystals sat in little clusters on the windowsill. Books about astrology, homeopathy, and herbal medicine were stacked in uneven towers. On the counter, in contrast to all the aesthetic greenery, sat a huge jar of pickled eggs, the old-school kind you see in diners. She came back with my drink, her bracelets clinking softly as she handed it to me. Then she tilted her head slightly, a conspiratorial smile playing on her lips. "Want to see something kind of weird?" she asked. I thought she meant a pet snake or some obscure thrift store find. Maybe a bizarre art project, I said sure. She walked over to the fridge, pulled it open, and crouched down. When she stood back up, she was holding a mason jar. Unlike the others on her shelf, this one wasn't filled with dried plants. It was filled with a dark, opaque liquid that clung thickly to the glass. At first, I honestly thought it was some sort of experimental kombucha or juice that had gone bad. Then she said, very matter-of-factly, "It's my blood." The words didn't register right away. My brain stalled, trying to decide if she was joking, waiting for a grin or a wink. None came. She held the jar up to the light like it was a prized possession, turning it slowly so the liquid shifted inside. "I keep it for health reasons," she said. "It's good to have on hand in case I ever need it." My grip tightened on the wine glass. I had no idea what expression I was making, but it definitely wasn't the one she was expecting. I couldn't even fake a curious nod. My stomach gave a small, sharp twist. She went on, explaining that she collected it over time, and that it was a mix from different dates. Dates, I realized after a moment, meant days. She spoke like it was completely reasonable to store jars of her own blood in the fridge, like other people kept leftovers. I glanced back toward the fridge. The door was still open a crack, and I could see more jars inside. Not as full as the one she was holding, but definitely the same dark, unsettling color. Questions piled in my head, none of them good. How was she getting it? Was it safe? Was it illegal? Was she doing this alone? She set the jar down on the counter like it was nothing and turned back to her cooking. The tomato sauce on the stove bubbled softly, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air, but my focus kept snapping back to that jar. There were small bubbles at the top, slow and deliberate, like it was breathing. I didn't want to eat anymore. I didn't even want to touch the counter. My pulse had picked up, the kind of nervous throng you feel when your body is ready to run, but you're still trying to play it cool. She kept talking as she chopped vegetables, slipping back into casual conversation like we hadn't just crossed into completely unfamiliar territory. Then she shifted again, her voice dipping slightly as she said, "Doctors don't understand the body like I do. I have ways of keeping myself balanced, ways most people aren't ready for." The way she said "ready for" made it sound less like an invitation and more like a warning. I nodded slowly, pretending to follow her train of thought while my mind worked out an exit strategy. She turned to grab something from the cupboard, and I took the chance to quietly pick up my bag. I slid my shoes back on, my movements measured quiet. "I just remembered something I have to deal with," I said, my voice steady but a little too quick. I thanked her for the wine and said I'd text her later. She didn't seem surprised, just smiled faintly and said, "No problem," as if this was the most ordinary night in the world. The hallway outside was colder, the air lighter. Each step down the stairs felt like shaking off a weight I hadn't realized was on my chest. I didn't stop walking until I was halfway down the block. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from her: "Come by tomorrow and I can teach you about my methods." I didn't reply. I didn't block her either, not right away. A part of me was curious to see if she'd keep reaching out. She didn't. That was the last message she sent. I never told our mutual friend the full story. I just said it didn't work out. But now every time I see a mason jar, even in a completely normal setting, My mind flashes back to that fridge, to the other jars sitting there in the back, and to the unspoken question of what exactly she planned to do with them. It's messed up how fast a normal night can flip into something you can't stop replaying in your head. We'd been talking for maybe 3 weeks. Not constantly, but enough to feel like I knew him a little. He wasn't overbearing, didn't spam my phone, and when we finally met for coffee, it was actually pretty decent. He was quieter in person, but in a way that made him seem harmless. That's probably why I didn't think twice when he suggested I come over for dinner the following weekend. He said he cooked. That alone felt rare enough to check out. Plus, he didn't live far, just a couple of bus stops away. I figured worst case scenario, I'd eat, be polite, and head home early if it was weird. The building was one of those newer apartments with that fake industrial vibe. Gray walls, exposed pipes, concrete floors, and the faint smell of laundry detergent lingering in the hallways. He buzzed me in, and as I stepped into the elevator, I noticed how quiet it was. No one else, just the soft hum of machinery and the faint echo of our footsteps. When the doors opened to his floor, I walked down the hallway toward his apartment. The air smelled cleaner than usual, almost antiseptic, which made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. When he opened the door, he was smiling. Hearing a wooden chopping board with vegetables, his apartment immediately struck me. It was spotless. Not just tidy. Every surface gleamed. Not a crumb, not a coffee ring, not even a stray shoe out of place. He had set the table already. A candle burned in the center, but not in a romantic way, more like a decorative touch from some home makeover video. I put my bag down and followed him toward the kitchen, trying to make casual conversation. I laughed at something he said about his terrible knife skills, but my eyes kept drifting. At first, I thought it was just a gallery wall. You know, the kind with random framed prints or abstract art meant to look cool. Except when I looked closer, my stomach dropped like someone had punched it. Every single frame was a photo of me. Not selfies I'd posted online, not snapshots with friends, nothing I'd ever intentionally shared. These were different. Some were so clearly taken without my knowledge. One was me walking out of the grocery store with a paper bag in my hands. Another was me sitting on a park bench last summer, headphones in, staring at my phone. There was one of me at the bus stop wearing a coat I hadn't worn in months. They weren't low-quality phone shots either. They were high-resolution, glossy, and each framed in the same black frame like some sort of curated exhibit. I froze in the middle of his living room, staring at the wall. My brain tried to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I counted at least 15 frames, all spaced evenly in a perfect grid, all showing me in different locations, different days. He noticed, but he didn't say a word, just kept stirring whatever was on the stove, like this wasn't insane, like it was completely normal. I wanted to say something, to scream, to ask how he could have these pictures, but my mouth felt full of sand. My head was buzzing so loudly I could barely focus on anything else. I started thinking back, the way he casually mentioned small details about me I hadn't shared. How he knew which bus route I took. How he mentioned a cafe I'd gone to with friends, even though I hadn't posted about it anywhere. My skin prickled. My legs felt heavy, but my pulse raced. I muttered something about needing to grab my phone from my bag and walked toward the door. I didn't even bother putting my coat on, just slid my shoes back on as quickly as I could. I began speaking from the kitchen, calling out something about dinner. I didn't wait to make sense of it. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and nearly dropped my bag. The smell had changed, sharper now, more chemical, like bleach. I pressed the elevator button and focused on the glowing numbers until the doors opened. Once I was outside, I didn't look back. I didn't run, but I walked like every step counted, like I was putting distance between me and something that wanted to follow. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone, trying to reassure myself that this wasn't real, that I had misunderstood something. But I knew deep down that I hadn't. When I finally got home, I sat on my bed, trying to think of any explanation that made sense. There wasn't one. There was no version of that wall that wasn't disturbing. The way the photos were framed and lit made it feel like he had stood there, waiting for the perfect moment, camera in hand. It wasn't casual. It was planned. I blocked his number without sending a message. No explanation, no confrontation. Just cut off the connection completely. I deleted the coffee shop photos from my phone so I wouldn't be tempted to look for clues. I didn't want to remember anything else. But I can't stop thinking about that wall. about how long it must have taken him to collect those pictures. How many times he had been close enough to take them without me knowing. How many more photos existed that didn't make it onto the wall. And the scariest part, I have no idea how he even knew me before we met. I keep replaying that night over and over, every little detail etched in my mind. The smell of the hallway, the way his kitchen light reflected on the glossy frames, the hum of the stove while I froze in the living room. Each time I close my eyes, I see the wall, perfectly arranged, my own face staring back at me. It's like he'd been following me for weeks, months, maybe longer, always careful to stay unseen, always careful to capture the right moment. Even now, I check my surroundings more carefully. Every time I walk down a street, I feel eyes on me. Every time someone approaches too casually, a voice in my head whispers that it could be him. The rational part of me knows it's probably not, but the images from that night are burned into my memory. I'll never forget that gallery wall. Not the perfect framing, not the glossy prints, not the way my face looked captured in moments I didn't even know were being recorded. I don't know if he meant to scare me or if he thought it was romantic. I don't care. All I know is that night changed how I see the world, how I see strangers, how I see myself. And sometimes when I think about it too much, I can almost hear the faint stirring of a knife or the quiet hum of a stove behind me, as if the walls themselves are whispering that he's still out there, still watching, still waiting. I should have known something was off the second I walked into that place. It wasn't just fancy. It was the kind of restaurant that doesn't even have prices on half the menu and makes you feel underdressed no matter what you're wearing. You know the type, white tablecloths that look like they'd been starched within an inch of their life, polished silverware lined up perfectly, and a hum of quiet conversation that somehow feels intimidating. I usually enjoy eating out, but the second I stepped through the doors, I felt a twinge of nervousness creep up my spine. We met through a small social event my coworker invited me to. She was new in town, pretty confident, and had that way of talking where you feel like you're supposed to impress her. When she suggested we go somewhere nice, I didn't think she meant the prettiest steakhouse in the city. I figured maybe sushi, maybe a cool rooftop bar, maybe a place where the most expensive item on the menu would make me do a double take. But no, she had chosen a restaurant that felt more like a showcase for someone else's money than a place to eat. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the middle of the room. The lighting was warm, the kind that makes everything look like a magazine cover. Every reflection on the crystal glassware seemed deliberate, like the restaurant itself wanted to impress. I sat down and tried to make small talk, asking about her weekend work, but she barely looked up. Her attention was glued to the menu. And here's the thing, I like eating out. I'm not cheap, but I usually stick to mid-range spots. She, on the other hand, went straight for the highest priced items without even pretending to skim the rest. Appetizers, main course, drinks. She picked the most extravagant options like she'd been planning this meal for weeks. The first dish arrived, a tiny plate with some fancy amuse-bouche. She barely touched it, just prodded at the food while scrolling through her phone. I ended up eating most of the starters myself, feeling guilty for letting them go to waste, but also feeling an unease I couldn't shake. When the mains arrived, she finally lit up. It wasn't a simple smile. It was a glow, almost predatory, like she had been waiting for this moment. Huge lobster tail, filet mignon, sides arranged meticulously like an art project. She ordered another drink, not the house stuff, the $25 a glass kind, and I realized I hadn't even looked at her wine when she first ordered. I was halfway through mine when she casually said it. She was just going to run to the bathroom real quick. I didn't think anything of it. I kept eating, scrolling my phone, sipping my wine. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started glancing toward the bathroom, trying to convince myself she'd just gotten held up. Still nothing. The waiter came over to clear some plates, glanced at her empty chair, and asked if everything was all right. I muttered that she just went to the bathroom. He gave me that polite but knowing look and walked away. I wanted to shrug it off, laugh it off, but inside, my stomach was nodding. Something wasn't right. Another 10 minutes passed. Panic began to creep in around the edges. I sent her a text, "You good?" No reply. Checked the bathroom again. Nothing. The quiet of the restaurant suddenly felt suffocating. The other diners were all tucked into their own conversations, but I felt eyes on me, or maybe it was just my imagination, a creeping paranoia feeding off my anxiety. Then the waiter returned, this time holding the check like it had been waiting for me all along. I hadn't even asked for it. The total stared at me like an accusation. $614.28. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misread the numbers. The appetizers alone were almost $100. There was a bottle of wine I hadn't touched, $180. The main courses, sides, extra drinks, my head spun with the math. I asked the waiter if he'd seen her leave. He shook his head, but his expression spoke volumes. I wasn't the first person this had happened to, it seemed. My throat went dry. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Nothing. My fingers shook as I scrolled through my messages, hoping I'd missed some clue, some small explanation. I even went outside to check the street, thinking maybe she had stepped out for a smoke or a phone call, maybe waiting for me to notice. But she was gone. Just empty pavement, streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt, and my own rapid breathing. When I returned inside, the manager approached. He wasn't rude, but his tone was firm. They weren't letting me leave without paying. I tried explaining, saying she had ordered half the items, but it didn't matter. The bill was mine now. My card felt heavier than usual in my hand as I swiped it. I watched the transaction approve like it was sealing my embarrassment. The waiter took the receipt without saying a word. I left slower than I would have liked, walking into the night with that strange mixture of relief and humiliation. I checked the street again, half expecting to see her leaning against a wall, laughing at some elaborate trick. Nothing. She had vanished completely, leaving me with the aftermath. Once home, I went through her socials. Her accounts were still up, but she had unfollowed me everywhere. The group chat from that coworker's event, she'd left. I even reached out to my coworker, hoping for some insight. She said she barely knew her, and then added quietly, I've heard something similar happen to another guy she met. Technically, it wasn't a crime. She hadn't stolen the food, she had ordered it, and I had agreed to pay in effect, but that didn't make it sting any less. $614.28 disappeared from my account, leaving behind a weird mixture of confusion, anger, and disbelief. I haven't been back to that restaurant since. Every time I pass the street, I glance at the door, half expecting a flash of her hair, a mischievous grin. The memory keeps playing on repeat, the table perfectly set, the glowing candle, the way she had carried herself with such calm authority while disappearing into thin air. And yeah, next time someone says, let's go somewhere nice, I'm picking a place and checking the menu first. It's weird how you can be sitting in someone's living room 1 minute, and the next you're questioning every single decision that led you there. I met him through a friend of a friend, not a dating app, not some random guy at a bar. We were all at this little cocktail place, and he seemed easy to talk to. He made a couple of sarcastic jokes that actually landed, remembered what drink I ordered, and didn't try too hard. A week later, he texted me saying he was having a quiet night in, and that I should come by for just one drink. I wasn't expecting fireworks, just figured it would be chill. He lived in this converted old house that had been split into flats. The hallway smelled faintly like burnt toast, and the carpet on the stairs was that kind of dark blue that hides stains. His place was small but tidy, did yellow lamps instead of harsh overhead lighting, a plant in the corner, a couple of mismatched mugs drying by the sink. I sat on his couch while he poured wine into tall glasses that looked more expensive than the rest of his kitchen. We were halfway through the bottle when he said he'd left something in his car. I didn't think twice about it. He grabbed his keys, stepped out, and as the door shut, I heard this weird clicking sound. It wasn't the usual sound of a lock from inside. It was sharper, like metal grinding from the outside. At first, I didn't move. I figured maybe it was just how his door sounded. But after a few minutes of scrolling on my phone, I noticed he was taking longer than seemed normal. I got up, casually walked over, and tried the handle. It didn't budge. I jiggled it a couple more times, harder this time. Locked. From the outside. The wine in my stomach suddenly felt heavier. I looked around his place, trying to make sense of it. No noise from the hallway. No sound of footsteps on the stairs. Just the hum of his fridge and that faint street noise through the closed window. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was an old building thing. Maybe the lock jammed when he left. But then I spotted something that made me stop. Right above the handle, there was a sliding latch. It was on the inside, but it wasn't being used, which meant the lock holding me in wasn't something I could open. I called his phone, straight to voicemail, texted him twice. No read receipts. My brain started running through possibilities, and none of them were good. I glanced at the window. It was the kind you had to push up to open, but when I tried, it barely moved an inch before hitting some kind of stopper. There was nothing dramatic about his flat. No weird smells, no creepy photos on the wall, nothing out of place. And somehow that made it worse, the normalness of it. I walked into the tiny kitchen, checked if there was a back door. Just a wall of cupboards and a frosted bathroom door. The bathroom window was even smaller. Every couple of minutes I listened at the main door for footsteps, but the hallway stayed silent. My phone battery was dropping fast, and I couldn't decide whether to call my friend or the police. Part of me still thought maybe I was overreacting, that he'd come back in with some stupid excuse. Then, maybe 15 minutes in, I heard something outside the door. Not footsteps, more like the sound of keys jingling than a slow scrape of metal in the lock. I froze. The instinct to back away was instant, but my legs felt locked in place. The door didn't open right away. It stayed still for a few seconds, then finally swung in. He walked in holding a plastic bag with a couple of snack packets and a bottle of Coke, like nothing was wrong. Smiled, said something about the shop being further than he remembered. I didn't mention the lock. I didn't even ask why it had taken so long. I just nodded and forced a smile, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. My brain was screaming at me to get out, but my mouth stayed shut because I didn't know how he'd react. We sat back down on the couch. I barely touched my drink after that. Every second felt stretched. He kept chatting about random stuff, his work, the movie he wanted to watch, but I couldn't stop glancing at the door. I was trying to figure out if I could get to it faster than him. When he got up to grab something from the kitchen, I made my move. I stood, walked to the door as casually as I could, and checked the handle. This time it turned. I opened it just enough to slip into the hallway before he noticed. He called my name, but I didn't stop. I took the stairs 2 at a time, didn't look back until I hit the street. It was dark outside, and my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone trying to order a ride. I never saw him again. He texted once the next day asking why I bailed, but I didn't answer. I didn't block him either. I wanted to see if he'd keep trying. He didn't. I still don't know why he locked the door. Maybe it was some twisted way to see how I'd react. Maybe he thought it was funny. Or maybe it was exactly what it felt like, a test to see what he could get away with. Either way, it was the last time I went anywhere for just one drink.